Hello and welcome back to Dukascopy TV. Well, it would seem that Switzerland is not giving up banking secrecy without a fight. Yesterday, the lower houses of Parliament voted against a draft law which would allow banking companies to share information with US tax authorities. Here to discuss the situation is Osmond Plummer. Osmond, thank you very much for coming in today.
A pleasure.
Now, the fact that the authorities decided not to really discuss it or not to go into much detail, would you consider this a bit of a step back, would you say?
Essentially, it depends on whose perspective you are looking at. It is certainly a bit of a problem from the legislative point of view from the Swiss National Council, because they feel there is a significant amount of pressure to enact this legislation to avoid potential sanctions on the Swiss banking system or the Swiss as a country from the US authorities, though it is unclear at this stage what the US may or may not do. There are a certain number of things that the US authorities could consider doing. One would be to deny Swiss companies access to US financial markets, which would be a significant problem for many Swiss companies. But it is also completely understandable that Swiss legislators feel that they do not wish to be dictated to by a foreign power, and certainly in this case the USA, and also any such law is going to have far-reaching consequences. It is not going to be just for the USA, and there have to be considerations as to what other countries may seek to take advantage of legislation like this.
Now, the move, it keeps the laws intact, as you said, but it does create problems for banking companies who may wish to share information and are barred by law. So therefore, who would you say is benefiting from this?
Well, at this stage, it is very much to the bank's benefit not to have to give information. However, if there are ultimately sanctions against the Swiss financial centre by the US government, this of course will be detrimental to the interests of those banks. Certainly to the larger internationalised banks, certainly UBS, Credit Suisse, which are very active internationally, there is a significant risk. But it's those banks that have already to a large extent complied with the requests from the US authorities. Smaller Swiss banks with less exposure to US markets, or that can remove themselves from exposure to US markets, may find this to their interest at this point and in the short term. Longer term, however, in the end, as the lessons of Eglin showed us, in the end, the compliance will become compulsory.
Now that is an interesting point you make there. We have a quote here, and it says that it's from the professor from the Bern Law School. It's saying that the biggest risks are for the smaller banks who are not yet in contact with the Department of Justice. Is this a sentiment that you would yourself agree with?
I'm not convinced that a lot of the smaller banks had any exposure to US national clients in the first place. It has always been known that there was a significant risk, especially if you're a smaller bank. And so I would suggest that many of these smaller banks are not at risk so much with the Department of Justice. But if a law like this does in the end become enacted, it will not just affect US clients, it will also affect EU clients and from other nationalities, and that will have a significant effect on smaller banks who draw most of their clients from surrounding countries, France, Germany and Italy.
Well, a lot of people say that the deal is now dead, so to speak. The deadline for the lower houses of Parliament to speak about it is Friday, so we've got a little bit of time, I guess, but after that they rest for the summer break. So how do you see this solution or this situation playing itself out? Do you see a solution in mind?
I think everybody will go away for the summer and rest and kick their heels. I don't think much will happen over the summer. The US goes into recess as well in Congress, and I think there will be an awful lot of diplomatic activity going backwards and forwards. I would expect to see a reworked version of the bill being presented to the lower house at a later date. It may take some time, but I think ultimately the notion of tax avoidance in foreign countries being a legal right almost in Swiss banks, and this banking secrecy of this strict nature will change. It is only a matter of time. In the G7 meeting at the moment, they're talking about transparency of companies and tax havens, and the pressure on Switzerland will only increase.
It seems like a luxury which maybe not last too long, I guess.
I don't think it's got many years to live, no.
Very interesting. Well, Osmond, thank you very much for coming in and talking it through with us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's all from Osmond and myself. Please do click back to Dukascopy TV for all our hourly updates and, of course, exclusive interviews. Goodbye for now.